Host
Kimberly Escobar.
On today's show, we'll be talking about sex education with our guests, Susan Cruz and Gretchen Sarantes from Huckleberry. Welcome, and please introduce yourselves. I'll start with you.
Thank you so much for having us. So my name is Susan Cruz. I am a senior health educator with Huckleberry. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. I'll let my wonderful coworker actually introduce herself.
Hey y'all, my name's Gretchen. I also go by she, her, and ella. Ella just means she in Spanish. I'm the other health educator of our Huckleberry Youth Programs.
I love the ella.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show and letting us learn with you along on the show today. We'll be talking about different types of information, which we're really excited for the youth to have that info. But before we do, just to get us out of our comfort zone and kind of like feeling more comfortable here, is I'm going to ask an icebreaker question, and it is, what is your favorite part of your day? And I'll start with Kim, just so that you guys can think a little bit about it.
Obviously going to bed.
Oh,
I think that's like the best part. I'm like 100% not a morning person. All my friends know that I do not wake up at all. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to change that habit because we always plan things for like 6 a.m. to do things, and I'm the one that always sleeps in, or like I'm the one that like texts like, oh, I'm up, and then I go back to sleep.
Yeah.
But I'd say my favorite part is definitely going to sleep. But besides that, I think that's for everyone, is going to the gym. Mm-hmm. And I go to the gym typically at night. So I guess during that time is my favorite part, because going to the gym just releases that stress, mm-hmm. and it just gives me those endorphins as well. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool.
Would you like to go first? Yeah. I think for me, it's like getting to eat. I love eating. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not very like structured eating. I won't do breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But at some point when I do eat, that's
your favorite part.
Yeah, my favorite part. Yeah.
I think for me, it's like between having my cafecito in the morning and like, or like having my coffee just really allows me to like be like, okay, I'm gonna be awake like in an hour, and I'm gonna like really process information a lot better. But then I get stuck with that like coffee anxiety, and I'm like, oh my god, like so much to think about, so much to do. But then like the next part of like my day that I really like doing is just going home and like really settling into my space. Just like gonna start being a couch potato and just gonna like scroll on my phone, like maybe just not talk, and that's all good. And I feel like that's like the time that I get to really be by myself and like really get in tune with like, how am I feeling today? How did today go?
Well, you guys all gave my favorite parts of my day: sleeping, eating, and getting home. I would definitely say for me is when at my house we have dinner, since I live with my family. So dinner, we all eat together. And so for me, it's kind of a regrounding myself to the floor, saying, hey, we got family. Like everything can be so busy, but the people at this table are the most important, and we're good and healthy. And so that for me is probably my favorite. And also I have a little brother. So whenever he gets home, I work from home most of the time. So when he comes home, he's always like, Nana, and he comes in, hugs. And so it's always my favorite part. And when he doesn't do that, I always like, where is he? But anyway, thank you guys so much for sharing. We're going to start off with the show, and my first question is, explaining what Huckleberry is, because I just learned that it didn't start in Marin, and I always thought it did. But with that means that there's a lot of people who don't even know what Huckleberry is. So I'm going to hand that to you guys and let us know what Huckleberry is, and then what your roles are and what you guys do.
For sure. Gretchen, would you like to explain the Marin?
Yeah. So we do have one site over in Marin, and we have 3 programs running. So today we are representing the health education team. But aside from that, there's also ACE that a lot of young people go to. If you're at TL, if you're at San Rafael High School, we also have mental health counseling as well available. But essentially what Huckleberry's goal is like supporting young people throughout their journey, throughout their youth, transitioning out. So that's essentially what it does. And we're all doing that in different aspects of their lives. So for us, it's like health based. And a lot of people like to think of it as like just sexual health, but realistically, there's a lot more to it. We're teaching young people, we're giving them a toolkit like, hey, like these are traits that you should look out for when it comes to relationships, friendships, or romantic relationships. And ACE does a lot more of the college-based things. So this would be, for example, if anyone needs support with financial aid, getting to college. I know a lot of people have shared, like, I wouldn't be who I am today if it weren't for like ACE Academy or if it weren't for Huckleberry. And mental health counseling does a lot of work with newcomers. So students who are new to the U.S., they're navigating going through US, navigating those spaces, a new language. So it's a lot of support for young people.
Yeah, and then in our San Francisco branch, we actually started out in San Francisco around the 1960s through a crisis shelter. And essentially it existed as a space, like in case of an emergency or a young person is trying to seek out services that, for example, they're in a crisis and they just need a home or they need like a place to stay for a night. That was like the intention of that shelter. So sorry, like
No worries.
And that essentially kind of still exists today. There are counselors at that site that help support that young person through that like navigation process. And they really try to emphasize family reunification. So like just kind of working out through family counseling, like problems or things that are coming up for them and how to address it, and having the young person feel a lot safer again. And then also we do have a Project Ready that helps younger people that are like at risk of being in the juvenile incarceration system, and trying to get them out of that system, and essentially just like really tries to make sure that they're like addressing like their grades or like continuation of school, or like if they just need to talk to a like counselor or case manager, they're able to like get a lot of that crisis intervention. And then we also have CARC, which is focused on people that have been in the incarceration system. So really like trying to get them through that whole process of navigating that system, because it already is really tough as a young person to like not have a lot of support. And they also try to support families through that too. And then we also have the health center out in San Francisco that runs through the same process that we do, but they do a lot of other services as well, like with mental health counseling, supplying like clothing in the case that somebody does need clothes, or also food or like hygiene supplies. They do a lot of those things. And then also at our clinic, specifically in the same combination of the Cole Street Clinic, we do our teen centers, which is like providing sexual and reproductive health services. So for our specific space in Marin, we do Teen Tuesday Clinic. So every Tuesday, our office turns into a totally free and confidential clinic for young people between the ages of 12 to 21 to come seek out services like pregnancy tests, Plan B, birth control. They also get like options counseling and a lot of other services. This is also completely confidential, meaning that they don't have to ask parent or guardian's permission to receive services with us. And also it comes at no cost, because I think a lot of the time, a lot of young people are really scared or like really nervous. Like, how do I know how much to pay for these things? So we really help try to ensure that they don't have to worry about any of those barriers.
Awesome. That's so much. Well, we're glad that Huckleberry supports a lot of different communities, and that's really awesome, because we do need that. With that, we are gonna focus a lot more kind of towards the health side, especially since Marin has their Tuesday clinic, right? And when I was in high school, I heard about that, but I never really like did my research and what it's for. And so our goal is to be able to kind of highlight what in the, since our show is about sex education, what they can expect whether they go in a clinic or other. For example, you mentioned also relationship building and all of that, which is when you're young, sometimes there's a for many, there's a barrier between asking your parents because it's kind of like awkward. And you kind of do research on your own. But that can also lead to wrong information, especially since online you can like get anything. So having resources where youth can go and ask these questions is our main goal for the show. Do you want anything?
Yeah, I think that was a lot of information. I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about ACE, just for if you could sum that up a little bit. What does the ACE stand for?
Yeah, so ACE stands for Access to College Equity. So equity is like everyone's equal, everyone has the same resources, they're given the same ability. And ACE is more geared towards first generation students. So if you're the first person in your family to go to college, it's a really great resource to look into. And a lot of the, our coworkers who are in ACE, they are also the first people to go to college in their family. So it makes it very relatable for the students who are in the program to be able to relate to their mentors.
Okay, I just wanted to know, just because I know some friends that were part of that. I was never part of that because my school didn't offer that. So my high school never had like health services like that. And I think you guys work mainly with SR. Or with what high schools do you guys work with? Because I know I went to SR just for a semester, and I remember I forgot what the class was called, but it was, I think, like health education or something. And like Huckleberry would come in and they would give like a topic and they would talk about it for like a few classes. And that's when I learned about Huckleberry. But I wasn't really sure with what you guys work with now and like how open it is now.
Yeah, so ACE in itself has been a program for a really long time. I feel like it's also been like one of the first programs that really also tries to target like a holistic approach to supporting young people in the navigation of their education success, because like they also work with our mental health counselors to ensure that like also like emotionally wise, like the young person is able to navigate like higher education, but also taking care of themselves in that process, because we all know like navigating like college, going to classes, and like academic success has so many other factors. And so with mental health being part of that program as well, it really helps continue that holistic approach and like seeing the young person for more than like just their grades, and like seeing them more than just like the classes that they're attending or the careers they want to seek out, and really taking care of them as well.
That's awesome. Thank you. You have any more questions?
No.
Okay. So that's really awesome. We'll put it in our comment sections, links to your website so that the youth can search more, because like you guys mentioned, there's different programs for different needs, which is really awesome. We're going to start off with the first question, which is a big one, and it's, what is sexual identity?
Perfect. Do you want to explain a little bit, Gretchen?
Yeah. So I feel like this question could go many different ways, because when we think of identity, we think of different aspects of ourselves, like how do we want to identify? And the way I think of sexual identity, it comes more towards like sexual orientation. And there's many different sexual orientations that people can decide for themselves. They're like, hey, like this is what I am attracted to. But for this question specifically, I kind of want to tie into gender identity. So gender identity more so has to do with how someone sees themselves internally. They're like, hey, you know what? This is what I feel within myself, and this is how I want to express it. They can express it in many different ways. A lot of people tend to see the world as like very binary. So what that means is like two different categories, and that's it. So that could be like someone who identifies as a woman, someone who identifies as a man, but we know there's many different ways that people can identify, whether it's one of those two or something in between, or a little bit something beyond that. So just saying that with someone's gender, it can be very fluid. It doesn't necessarily have to be restricted to one set category. So realistically, just it's going to be individual for every person.
And that process, I feel like, also is just like a long process in figuring out what people's identity is going to look overall. Because I remember that when I first heard this question, I feel like identity in itself is so hard to always pinpoint because it's just like these really abstract or like big ideas, and you're like, how do we put it into terms that people can understand them? And so all of it is going to have its own timeline. It's always going to be like because of factors that influence like what people's experiences are and what they are feeling in that exact moment versus like maybe 20 years down the line, they're like, you know what, actually, I'm starting to have a little bit of questions about myself and I'm not really sure where I can start with this. And so people can start that super early on in like the reflection of who they are, or like even later on if they're like, you know what, I'm good with where I am, and that's totally fine. But identity as itself can just like be broken down kind of like what Gretchen talked about through that gender identity, through the sexual orientation, and then also gender expression, and even assigned sets. So like assigned sets in itself, we can think of it like what a doctor assigns like on our birth certificate, like as a female, male, and in some cases, some people can be born intersex. So that like can be defined by a lot of different factors. And then we have gender identity that is like more of an internal experience that somebody's experiencing with their gender. And like Gretchen talked about with like man, woman, someone being like non-binary or trans. And there's a lot of different ways that people define those terms. And then there's sexual orientation, who people are attracted to, whether it's emotionally or even romantically or even sexually, which can be like broken down into so many things too. And then after that, we have gender expression, where like it's like the clothes that we wear, the way that we talk to people, the way that we like put on makeup or we don't use makeup, or like so ways that people like try to present themselves to the outer world. But even then, when we're thinking of identity, a lot of it will be influenced by our society. So like even if people are trying to go outside of those like things that we see as like normal, sometimes there's like a lot of discrimination or a lot of prejudice that people come into with their own like values, where they're like, oh, well, that's not how people are supposed to be. But I think it's like in those reflection periods, we can really understand that identity has so many other things coming up for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a question. You guys shared so much. It's very complex. But then you guys kind of lowered it, so I can understand a little bit. So just to clarify, sexual orientation is what you are attracted to, and then because that was my next question. Do you want to add anything?
No, I was gonna say if you can state what's the main difference between sexual identity and sexual orientation, just because I think I also confuse that.
Yeah,
when I think
same
of
thing.
identity, I think of like who I am, and then my orientation, I just think of like what my sex is. But I feel like they kind of intertwine. But I don't know if you guys can explain.
Yeah, because I also mix it too.
Yeah. So when we think of sexual identity, I think we kind of try to stem away from the sexual part because it has more so to do with like someone's gender identity, versus sexual orientation has to do with like who you're attracted to. So when we think of attraction, you can be attracted to someone in so many different ways. So it could be like that sexual attraction. It's like, oh my God, like I really want to kiss this person one day. Or, like I'd really like to hug this person one day. Versus romantic attraction, it goes beyond that. You may be really attracted to the way that someone really thinks. You're like, wow, like this person, like their vibe is super cool, super dope. Like I really want to get to know them. So that's the way that I like to think of sexual orientation. And there's many different ways that people can be. Sometimes people don't even feel sexual attraction towards others. So with that could be someone who's asexual. They're like, hey, you know what? I don't really have the desire to kiss someone. I don't really have the desire to do anything intimate with someone in that way. But maybe I really want to be someone's friend, and that's about it.
Okay.
And like you all mentioned, because I know that there was some confusion about like what's the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. Those are independent, like they're their own thing. And I think we, even in our classes, sometimes when we're teaching these type of like conversations, there's a lot of confusion about it too. So like the best way that I like to explain it is like gender identity is like you looking in at yourself, versus sexual orientation is how you feel about other people. And so there's like a lot of different things that like come into that, kind of like what Gretchen was talking about, like that romantic versus sexual, and even like emotional, because all of those things like will play into how people feel about others. And that's kind of how we are able to break it down a little bit further. But to give you like an example, it's like breaking down the like LGBTQ community and like those identities. So typically in our classes for gender identity, we like to break down like cisgender versus somebody that is gender diverse. Someone that is cisgender is going to like align with the identity or the assigned sets that they were given at birth. So like their doctor marked on their birth certificate that they're a female or that they're a male or intersex, and that person is growing up and they're able to understand themselves a lot more, and they're like, yeah, actually I do feel like a girl, I do feel like a boy, like I do feel like those things are correct about me. Versus somebody that might be under the gender diverse umbrella sometimes may experience like dysphoria or feelings of discomfort around the way that they like are placing their gender on, how people are placing their gender on them. So maybe like they're getting put in dresses and they're like, I don't actually like that. It doesn't feel comfortable. Or like they want to cut their hair shorter, like super early on in their life. And they're just like, I just want to express myself in this way. And all of those things are just like reflections of like themselves and like maybe them figuring out that they might fit under the gender diverse umbrella. Like maybe being non-binary, where like people don't always see themselves as a man or as a woman. Maybe they feel themselves aligned outside of those ideas. Or even trans, and like being either like through the process of figuring out like maybe I want to go through surgeries that reaffirm the way that I want to look inside. But there's a lot of trans individuals that also don't do those surgeries or don't go through medication process, and they can still be trans or even gender diverse. So there's like always ongoing language that's going to like change because people are so individual. Everyone has their own individual process in how they see themselves and how they see the world. So obviously language isn't always going to encompass all of those experiences. And that's why we are always hearing these like new identities. And then with sexual orientation, we can see that like a lot of the times people assume that everyone's heterosexual, meaning that everyone is attracted to the opposite gender. So like if a man is attracted to a woman or a woman is attracted to a man, and that's usually what we see as like normal, or like seen as the most common in our society. But that's not also like really true. A lot of the time there's people that might identify as a lesbian, or there's people that might identify as gay or queer. And there's like all of these different identities that like are also speaking to those experiences. But when we are normalizing that these things are more common, like someone being heterosexual or someone being cisgender, we're also adding to like the stigma that sometimes may come up with like people are not figuring out themselves a lot sooner, or even just like them kind of like realizing, hey, I'm having these questions, who do I ask? Especially when like that stigma is so connected to certain individuals.
Mm-hmm. And since we're on the topic of gender identity, do you mind breaking down what each gender is? I know there's cisgender, agender, and just I feel like I don't have that full concept of what each one is and how to refer to someone as it. So,
so kind of what Susan was saying. So cisgender is what society sees as like normal. So again, cisgender just means that this person aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth. They're like, you know what? Yeah, I do feel like a girl. That's what I am. And then if we go into intersex, for example, intersex would be someone who could be various things. Could be someone who was born with ambiguous genitals and maybe a doctor took a look and they're like, hey, you know what? I can't really tell what this is. So they'll mark down intersex on their birth certificate. Another instance,
that's new for me.
Another instance could be the set of chromosomes. Maybe they're not medically, or they don't align what is medically defined as like female or male within their chromosomes. So that's another way that could also interpret that person as intersex. So it's very different. That's why we say like our sex is a combination of many different things. Has to do with like your genitals, your chromosomes, and those aspects. So that's like intersex. And then if we go into more gender diverse individuals, we could start off with transgender individuals. So these are people who maybe doctor assigned them at birth, let's say, for example, male, but that person, because when you're a baby, you can't really communicate. Things that you're going to do is like cry, poop, maybe burp, stuff like that. But as you're growing up, you're like, hey, I'm getting a sense of who I am. I'm seeing different things. I'm playing with these different type of toys, or I like to express myself in this type of fashion. everyone is going to have a sense of their identity. And that person could be like, hey, you know what? I don't really align with what the doctor assigned me as a male. I align as something else, maybe female, or maybe as a girl. So those would be transgender individuals. And we could go really into it too. Agender just means like this person is like, you know what, I don't want to identify myself with a gender. They're a lot more gender neutral or don't present a gender in itself.
Mm-hmm. And that's connected with pronouns?
Could be.
Sometimes it could be. I think sometimes like we like to talk to our young people about pronouns as just like this really simple thing. Like it's just a way to refer to somebody. So like in the beginning, Gretchen and I introduced ourselves with like our pronouns, like she, her, and ella, which is like she again in Spanish. But there's like so many different pronouns that people can use. But pronouns are just like this like noun that people can use in order to like refer to themselves. Maybe if they're in the space with other people or like not in the space. And some people use she, her, some people use he, him, or they, them. Some people use a combination of them, or like they just might exclusively use one set of them. But that doesn't actually have anything to do with their gender identity. It's just like their pronouns that they want to use or feel comfortable with. And like those always can change. So people can like use like a variety of them. And if they want to switch them around, like they can do that as they want to. And like the like harder part about like Spanish, sometimes like Spanish language, is that pronouns sometimes like we only hear them as ella, él, but there's also a neutral one is also known as ella. And so some people can also use those in order to be able to like use they, them, but like in Spanish. And so yeah, language is like really complex.
I would think it's ellos.
Yeah, it's like it sounds like it would be, but E is like used a lot of the time in order to make things gender neutral in Spanish. So like some people started straying away from like Latinx and started using Latine to make things more inclusive and like that inclusive language. And in English, it's a lot easier to do because like things are engendered in English language as like they are in like Spanish or like in other languages like Italian, French, and all of those. So English is kind of where like everyone's able to like kind of figure out like, okay, well, we want to use it in this way. So that's a little bit more about pronouns.
And all of the reason why we started with this is because it's something that, as you can tell, I mean, I'm 22 years old and I'm very like learning along the way because it is very different from when we were kids. And when I mentioned before the show, I was like, I remember how we were taught. And then when I was in high school, Huckleberry came and they gave a completely different aspect. But, you know, I was like 15 or 16, my brain, you know, health class, you don't really pay attention as much. And so we want to start off with that because when we're talking about what we're later going to be talking about, so it can make sense to our audience a little bit more of what we're talking about. But with that being said, do you guys provide resources for those who want to know more about basically what we talked about?
Yeah, we do. Gretchen, do you want to talk a little bit about some of those resources?
Yeah, so shout out to Susan. She actually created our guidebook, which is essentially, it's like these worksheets that the students get when we are presenting, and they'll have like a set of things that they can fill out. But within those, yes, they have fill in the blank areas, but there's also tons of different resources. So at the back of those pages, we have a whole bunch of resources. We have sexual and reproductive health services if someone wants to look into that. We also have resources for individuals who may identify as queer or LGBTQ and more. And we also have a set breakdown of all those different terms. So if someone's like, oh, you said something, but I didn't really catch it, I want to look back at it later, they definitely can. We have those definitions lined up for them. So yeah, it's really great. And also those students, those workbooks are for them to keep at the end of our lecture. We don't take them away from them. So if they want to look more into it, they definitely can.
And then like to talk a little bit, I feel like we also brushed over, like we do go into classrooms, but we're in the classroom for 6 days. So we like talk usually first, our first opener is sexuality and identity.
That's what I remember.
That's kind of like, let's start with like language, let's start with our identity. And we're constantly trying to update our like information too. Like we as have learned of being in this space, and like myself like being in my like mid 20s, and then Gretchen like being also like starting to be in like her early 20s, mid 20s, we're like still so far off base of like what the younger Gen Z is experiencing in this current time. So we're always like, let's bring in some celebrities that they might know and like that identify in these like identities, so that they are like able to connect. Oh, like this person sees themselves as this way. So sometimes like in our classes, we'll show like Bad Bunny and like makeup or like having nails on, because like that way we can like talk a little bit more about gender expression and how like it's not always just connected to like sexual orientation or who someone is attracted to. Or like even those booklets will like have a lot of those breakdowns, and at first like some students are like, oh my god, who are you, like why are you here to talk to me about identity? But within like the 6 days, we're really able to get them out of their comfort zone, and we're able to get them to like ask us questions as well at the end of every day, where they can ask anonymous questions and we'll answer them on the last day with them, so that they can get those answers like right away. But we also refer to like our Instagram, where we offer a lot of information that we do in our classes. So our health education team, and also in collaboration with our SF health education team, we have created a lot of content around identity, and also a lot around like a lot of these other topics that we go into. So if you all want to follow us, it's at HYP Teen Health, and we have a lot of information about like gender identity, sexual orientation, and like a lot of these like newer like terms and things, because like yes, absolutely, I want to acknowledge like a lot of this changes, and we have also been in that process like day in into like the change, and like seeing what can we do to improve what we're talking about, or to make it more relatable, or to like learn slang and like use like the slang that they're using right now in order to talk to them in a way they relate to us, which I'm sure they cringe at, because they're like, why are you talking to me in this way?
Thank you so much for sharing. We're right at the halfway mark, so we're going to play a song, Sole Purpose by Evolving Wings, and we will be right back.
Yeah. Evolving Wings. Yo. I'm a genius, original purpose, resurrect like the phoenix. From the mother lotus emerges, no longer feel worthless. To be a service to purpose, it's evolving wings por vida. Got them all like Mira, internal play in the brain, got me insane. Explain the pain, the seats pain, my soul wounded. Some moves can't be computed. God's great shadows meet the darkest alley. Demons came for me, but archangels parried. Swiss swings shut the souls rapidly. Call it horror meets fantasy. Lower energies move like cavities. Sucker MCs, no substance. Ignore the earth's cry. Sucker MCs, no substance. Don't realize we never die. Misguided by subsidized lies. I'm guided by my ancestors' war cries. Born floor spitting truth, encouraging your spine. Evolving wings, manifesting your divine. Don't give up, fly. Compassionate can't pay my soul purpose. Wings up, wings up, wings up, wings up. Compassionate can't pay my soul purpose. Wings up, wings up, wings up, wings up. Compassionate can't pay my soul purpose. Wings up, wings up, wings up. Compassionate can't pay my soul purpose. Wings up, wings up.
Fui bendecido por los grandes que fijan cuatro paredes, no pudieron descifrar esta trivia. No compartieron visiones que nos preceden, las ansias de esta arrebata en el alma que nos conmueve.
Welcome back, and that was a song by Evolving Wings. And before we dive right back into our next topic, I will be saying a few PSAs. As you all know, we have an open mic every end of the month on Fridays. This month, it will be on April 26th. 26, I was right on that date. Doors open at 6 p.m. and it's till 8 p.m. You can register if you'd like to at the Multicultural Center online, and we'll have that in our description. And then also another thing that's coming up really shortly is our career fair that is hosted by Tay Radio Marin here at the Multicultural Center, and we hope to see you there. If you would like to volunteer, you can also find that application at the Multicultural Center of Marin. .org on our website. That will also be linked, and our career Sorry, tongue twister. Our career fair will be on May 1st from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. And we will have various different tables here and different opportunities, job opportunities or internships. And we are also sponsored by Kaiser Permanente and Mechanics Bank. And we would like to give them a huge shout out for sponsoring us this year. And yeah, that's all for our announcements. And now we're just going to dive right back into our conversation. Before we switch topics, I just wanted to ask a final question with gender identity and everything. I was just wondering how, for teenagers, as you mentioned before, where teenagers or maybe later on in your life, where you might not know and you might question your identity. And if, like, for instance, like for me, if I was questioning my identity and I went into Huckleberry and like I just learned about this from Tay Radio, like what should I expect going in, and like should I do anything beforehand going in?
Great question. I feel like it depends on a few things, because if someone is coming into teen clinic and they're like having questions about identity, or maybe like questions about just like, where do I go if I want to meet more queer individuals, or like want to learn more about like beyond your workshops, we usually recommend the Spar Center, but unfortunately they closed.
Oh, really?
So there's a little bit of limited support right now in terms of the LGBTQ space here in Marin County. So right now what we have been recommending is the SF LGBT Center and also the Oakland LGBTQ Center. They're a little further away, but they do host events for a lot of young people and also people that are a little older. So like age people that are like in between their like maybe their early 20s, where they go on hikes, they go on like also Zoom like meetings where like they talk maybe about like their experiences in figuring out their identity, because sometimes like it's so scary to like have those questions, especially if you're like, oh my God, I don't even know where to start. Yeah. And you see all this information online and you're like, oh my God, people already know this about themselves. Like, where do I even go? Yeah. So we really recommend like just getting into like a space where you're finding community, and whether that's like going to join a tabling event or going to a workshop, there's tons of great resources, but also Trevor Project also has really great guides about if people are questioning their identity. I think it's called the Coming Out Guide. And we also like to provide information around that. So it like breaks down identity a lot further. So those definitions that we broke down earlier, it gives like a lot more language around that. It also validates the people's experiences, because oftentimes like it comes with a lot of scariness to have to share this information with other people. So we really try to make sure that people are feeling like they're able to get resources in every way. But just as like my own plain like advice for that is that there is no such thing as a timeline for people to figure out their identity. People can figure out their identity whenever, wherever they feel like they're starting to have those questions. And there is a huge group of people that are part of the LGBTQ community that are like waiting for people that are in those situations to also support them. So there's a lot of support. But if anyone ever feels like they need to talk a little bit further about it, at Teen Tuesday Clinic, they can go through health education. And Gretchen and I usually have like spaces where we talk a little bit more about sexual and reproductive health services, but they can also ask us questions about like identity in those spaces, and we will refer them out to resources. Our case managers are on site too for the mental health team. So they can ask them questions about like finding a supportive adult, or maybe finding support around them that can guide a lot of those questions that they're having.
Oh, one more question piggybacking from that. The Teen Tuesday Clinic is available for 13 to 21-year-old?
So from 12 to 21.
12 to 21.
12 to 21.
What's the instance if someone over 21 goes for these services? Are they just redirected to someone else, or does Huckleberry still provide those services aside from like Teen Tuesday?
So if someone is over 21 and they want to get reproductive and sexual health services, unfortunately we do have to turn them away, but we'll usually give them resources. So we work in collaboration with Marin community clinics where they can also get the same services. And I think they even they provide a lot more as well. Additionally to that, we also refer them out to Planned Parenthood, who we also work very closely with as well. So if someone does want to get those services, we'll refer them there. We'll also help them with the appointment system as well if they need help. But mental health counseling, we do also offer mental health counseling. That's up to the age of 25.
Okay, so certain resources that you guys provide are for different age groups?
Yeah, so just to break it down a little bit further, because I feel like sometimes it's so confusing. So for sexual and reproductive health services like pregnancy tests, STI testing, birth control methods, Plan B, all of those sexual and reproductive things, we do between the ages of 12 to 21. If someone is older than 21, kind of going along with what Gretchen mentioned, we will always refer them out to someone. They will never like be in a situation where they're like, oh, okay, like, thank you for nothing. We will make sure and follow up that they have all the things that they need in order to feel empowered by like their choices. And then for mental health, we do offer services for 14 to 25-year-olds. And they usually fill out a screener. So they'll fill out a set of questions that will ask them like immediately where like they need to be assessed. I think there's some questions around like substance use. There's also questions around like their sexual and reproductive health, supportive community around them. And they try to get them resources, either if they're really high risk or like in the higher range of that assessment, they will immediately check in with one of our mental health counselors. And they will talk a little bit more about getting them support either outside in the community or in Huckleberry itself. Or with our case managers, they will work on like the things that they like got assessed that are a little lower. So maybe they just need to like get some toothbrushes, or maybe they like need to talk a little bit more about like classes that they're not doing good in. So we redirect them to like ACE, and then we're like, okay, like here, let's intertwine you with everyone else. So I feel like it's like all interconnected. And we really try to make sure that it works that way so that no student or no young person is left in a situation where they're like, I'm not really sure who I can go to. And this is like under the same exact free and confidential, so no cost, don't have to figure out about paying us for any of these services, and also all private, so not having to ask a parent or guardian for any of these services or permission to receive these services.
Okay. Thank you for answering.
Thank you. It's a lot, but it's, you guys are targeting so many, and it's awesome that you guys do that.
Thank you.
I think now we can switch over a little bit. We're gonna now be switching over to our second topic, that's talking more about sexual relations and like having just consent, how to communicate properly with one another, romantically, friendship wise. And can you just explain the importance of consent and how you should communicate with one another? Because I think I've experienced that personally with like other people. Like sometimes for myself as a teenager, I've had this issue like recently where I don't know how to put a boundary between me and someone. Like there's been instances where someone wants to give me a hug, but I don't know how to say like, I don't want to hug because I don't want to come off as rude. So can you guys just explain like how to properly communicate that with someone?
And what is consent?
Yes.
Yeah. We could think of consent as permission to do something, something that's like freely given. But I'm just going to say, like, in general, it is really hard to assert your boundaries. Yeah, we're here to provide that information, but like doing the work is really difficult, especially like when you're dealing with other individuals who are coming from different backgrounds. Maybe they don't have the same knowledge. Sometimes even with our parents, we're like, what do you mean boundaries? Like, I don't know what that is. So it is very difficult to do. And that's why I feel like sometimes when we are talking about these things, it's really important to start from like the framework, from like the bottom of it. It's like, hey, like describing what boundaries are. It's like the line between what you're comfortable with doing versus what you're not so comfortable with doing. And that's why it's really great learning about like phrases. So like, for example, if you don't want to hug someone, be like just like a little fist bump.
A little high five.
You know, the thing is, I literally, okay, this actually happened like a few days ago. Like, the person came up to me, I shook their hand, and then like, as like we were saying bye, they like try to hug me. And that's when, cause like my way of like kind of putting the boundary was when I first like took out my hand
Yeah.
when I said like, okay, like I'm comfortable with handshaking, but then they went for a hug when they were leaving.
Yeah.
And then at that point I didn't know what to do, so I just like gave them a hug back, but I didn't know how to like be like, I don't want to hug.
I think something big that happens with boundaries also is just like we're constantly thinking about like, how is this person going to receive this boundary I want to put. So just off the bat, you're not responsible for the reaction or like the comfort of another person when it comes to you asserting your boundaries. So for example, like if someone's being really persistent in asking somebody out, because that happens a lot. I feel like that is like a huge thing that happens with like boundary setting, and especially if someone is like, no, I really don't want to go out with you, or no, I don't want to go grab dinner with you. It's like really hard to turn people down, and that's just because our culture in general is like so uncomfortable with telling people like no. So practicing no is like a really great method to be able to assert like to have like more communication, to have assertive communication. So usually with consent in itself, we really try to make sure that people understand that it's just you communicating your boundaries. And when people are communicating their boundaries, just because somebody may not want to do something, it does not come from a personal space. It comes from that person just like wanting themselves to be safe and comfortable. We can't take it personal if that person doesn't want a hug or doesn't want to go out to dinner or doesn't want to maybe even in a sexual relationship have sex. And so that is kind of where we need to like think about that. And especially when people are in certain relationships where they might not necessarily feel like they have built trust yet with another person, it can be really hard to assert that because it's easier to let people to cross your boundaries because you don't have that trust or that comfort in your relationship yet. But it's practice and practice. Like Gretchen mentioned, it's so much harder to do than it is to say it out loud. Like in our minds, we're like, yeah, I'm gonna do it the next time. I'm gonna practice what I want to do, and then you're like, oh wait, I didn't do it the way that I wanted. Let me think about that again. So as you are practicing those things and you're kind of putting the trial and error, you're able to make it a lot easier for yourself to assert those boundaries and really letting somebody know, hey, like I like don't really want to touch you right now, or like I don't want to be touched. And then boundaries in itself can be like a lot of different things, like emotional boundaries. Like sometimes we have like really intense days, or like we're like feeling really emotionally exhausted, and then someone is coming in with like, hey, can I tell you what happened at work? And you're like, I guess, like, sure, like, let me listen to you. And you're like, I'm not fully there to talk to you. But even just letting someone know, hey, like, maybe let's take some time to share this and another point, like when you're feeling emotionally ready. Or even like with physical boundaries, a lot of time in like the Latina community, it's super normal to hug your family members. It's like, let's hug, let's all like receive each other and say hi through hugs. And so even like being like, hey, I don't really want to do that. Maybe let me just wave hi. Like even just switching those things and like making yourself be sure in those like physical actions, like that's something that you feel comfortable with, can be a really great way to practice it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Especially when it comes to sexual boundaries, I think that that's a super key information to know when to say no, especially because normally a lot of people, because I'm in a relationship with someone, it's kind of like a green light for everything that, you know, we can do together. But setting boundaries when saying no to doing anything physical is really important to understand and to know, because you don't want to be forced into doing something you don't want to do. And it can be really hard to communicate that. And especially when we're talking about, you know, things that are more physical, the boundary is super, super important.
How do you guys address certain topics? I think especially kind of towards men in a way of like with like you saying no to them and them not understanding no. How do you guys teach that to individuals on like accepting that no in a way?
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit more about our rejection piece that we do in our consent?
Oh, you guys do a rejection.
Yeah,
oh, interesting.
We're like, we gotta teach them young.
So obviously when people are asserting their boundaries, or just like life in general, you're gonna hear a no at some point in time. Even if someone's like always been able to get along that way, like everything's come super easy for them, And when you're receiving a no, it does bring up a lot of feelings. You're like, why is this person saying no to me? Like, what did I do wrong? Or like, is there something wrong with me? A lot of people internalize that. And also when it has to do with, for example, like men, we live in a society where men are seen as like holding a lot of power, and like receiving a no can be very embarrassing for them, especially like if they go back to their friends and they're like, haha, like you got rejected, ha ha ha. So with those settings, it's just, honestly, I really like to think of like people are prioritizing themselves if they're like, hey, you know what, like I don't really want to go out with this person, like, and it's nothing like personal, it's just like I'm not interested in you. And realistically, like you could be opening a door up for them and being like, hey, like you should go find somebody else who is interested in you. But yeah, I don't know, Susan.
Yeah, I think that like that's a really great way to think about it. And like those power dynamics, I feel like it's just a lot when it comes to boundaries, consent, and like relationships. It's like really knowing that, hey, like if I communicate no, this person sees me as an equal and will respect that no. But if there's like an imbalance of power, and maybe let's say like somebody is older or somebody has more influence in that situation, it can sometimes throw off that like feeling of like, oh, I might not be able to say no because this person is going to be upset with me, or because like I have already a relationship with them. Especially, I think you brought up something about like with sexual boundaries specifically. If people are already in a relationship, we get that a lot of the time because like sometimes people can feel maybe even entitled to some aspect of like other people's like boundaries or actions that they like want. And we really try to break it down that at no point does it mean that just because you have a relationship with somebody, you do not owe them anything. Like you don't, especially when it comes to sets, like people don't owe their partner sets at any point. Whether they've been together for 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, like that can always change. And people's like sexual interactions with each other should always be in communication that everyone is comfortable. And again, addressing that power dynamic that sometimes can even exist in certain relationships, because if you have like those healthy aspects of your relationship, like healthy communication, open and honest communication, you might feel a lot better communicating like, actually, I really don't want to do it. And your partner is like, okay, sounds good. Like maybe let's think about it another time. But if that person doesn't feel like they trust their partner yet, or maybe like their partner is showing like maybe warning signs, and they might want to communicate no to like having sex, maybe that situation might feel really uncomfortable to address a no. Like the person might like not feel super comfortable letting the other person know officially like all of the things that they're thinking, because there's an imbalance of power. And so really thinking about those situations would be really, really helpful to think about like how to communicate consent, how to have healthier relationships, and if trust and also open and honest communication are being addressed, like then it's a lot easier to be able to communicate anything that you need in that relationship.
And I think going off of that with relationships, like a lot of teenagers, I think like nowadays, like toxicity, you know, is really like normalized. And sometimes teenagers tend to not see the point of like actual toxicity where it can lead to you being in danger. How can teenagers escape from that? And like, does Huckleberry have resources for those teenagers?
I think it's definitely like romanticized. Like, ooh, you're toxic. Ooh.
They fight for you.
Yeah. And we could even see it through like media, like Euphoria, for example. It definitely romanticizes it. But I think where it starts is like being able to have the education, like knowing, for example, like these green flags, these are things that like, yes, these are things that I actually want in a relationship, whether it's relationship, friendship, versus like what are the warning signs and what's like a red flag, like, hey, like I should definitely like get out of this thing. So it definitely starts there. And I think what really helps for us, because we've done a lot of work with our navigating relationships piece, that I feel like is at a place now where students don't really question it anymore. They're not really like fighting against it. They're like, oh, okay, like I see this now. And I'm like, they're able to hold that information for themselves and then hopefully relay that to like a friend or someone who may be going through that.
And that's usually done on our 5th day of our educational series where we talk about navigating healthy relationships. We'll usually start with like, what are values about yourself that you can apply to yourself, and like, what do you bring to the table? Like, what is it that you makes you a good friend or makes you a good partner? And like that gives them a moment to like reflect on like those things about themselves that they're like, oh, actually, I'm really fun, and I feel like my friends and my partner always know that they're gonna have a really good time with me. And then we go into defining those green flags, which oftentimes we like talk about boundaries, we talk about consent, we talk about accountability and like responsibility of like, if your partner is like upset because of something that you said, taking that accountability of like, hey, actually what I said was kind of mean, and like, I'm really sorry. And like knowing that just because you're saying sorry doesn't mean that it's going to be okay. Like, you have to actually work in those actions to show the other person you're changing. And they're usually like, oh, okay. Like, as they're receiving our information, they're like really taking a moment to like think about those things. And then Gretchen created a really cool like quiz. It's called a deal breaker mentee, and it gives them scenarios where they're like, oh, okay, I really want to stay in this relationship because this person is like really supportive of my decisions. They have a lot of aspirations, versus like them thinking through like their deal breakers of like, oh, like this person like it doesn't want to communicate with me. They don't want to compromise. Or this person is asking me for things that feel like uncomfortable. And that has no right answer. It's very personal to every single person that has their laptop in those spaces, and like they can answer however they want. And then we still try to address like the warning signs in that, because we have obvious warning signs that come up. Like, if they're not communicating, what do we think happens in those situations? And then that's usually when we go into like talking about red flags and like warning signs. But I think it's really important to define that from like abuse, because I feel like with warning signs, it still allows somebody the ability to take that responsibility of things that they're doing. So like, if they're jealous, if that jealousy is coming from a place of like insecurity, and if they're trying to have power and control over their partner, that's when we can see that that's like a really big warning sign. Versus like, if that jealousy is like, oh, like, I just don't like the way that this person is looking at you, then we can think of like, that's pretty like normal. People experience those feelings, but it's like communicating that with your partner and telling them like, hey, I'm feeling a little jealous because of this thing, can open that like pathway for more communication. And also a little bit of like more information around those warning signs, it still allows somebody the ability to work on their relationship to make it like a healthy relationship. But if things like a lot of those warning signs are showing up, and there's like a lot of like those toxic behaviors are outweighing those really good things, then it's kind of time to like dissect like, what is it about this relationship that's not working? Are we not compatible with each other? And then abuse is like somebody having that power and control over another person, and that is kind of where no longer that situation can ever go back to being a healthy relationship. Even through counseling and through trying to figure out that conversation with another person, it will probably not really be fixed, because now this person has shown that they have shown abusive behavior. And we really try to break that down through a lot of different ways. Gretchen, do you want to talk about those abusive factors that we talk a little bit more about?
There's so many. A lot of people think of like abuse as like just physical, but we see it in many different aspects. So like, for example, I'm going to bring up like emotionally, there's like love bombing someone. And some people are like, what? Like, no, that's not abusive.
What's a love bombing?
So love bombing is like someone who may be giving a person like a lot of affection, a lot of love. They're saying like very sweet things for them. But when it becomes abusive is when they're trying to use it to manipulate that person, like saying like, oh, you're going to go out with your friends. That means you don't love me. Like, I give you all this love. I give you all this attention. Why do you want to leave me for your friends? So saying something like that.
Like, they're using it like as a manipulation tactic. Like, it might even be shown as like saying I love you super early on in the relationship, because like they want to show like, hey, I have the control here. Because then when things like other types of abuse show up in that situation, they're like, wait, but like I told you I loved you already. And so it kind of uses that emotional connection that somebody has, and they're like, oh, I guess I do love you too, but now I don't know how I feel about you because now this other thing came up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Continue. We have only We have 1 more minute left. We didn't even get to like so much because of how complex this topic is. I mean, I feel like we just are in like day 2 of your of what you normally give out of the 6 days. I mean, we missed out on like STIs, birth control, periods, and so many other things. So I feel really bad because we didn't get to that. However, I do want to highlight where they can get those resources. So if you could really quickly you know what? I think we're running out of time. So we'll leave the link to your website in the on the Facebook and YouTube so they can go out and do a little bit of research on their own.
And our Instagram will always have that information too, and like it has broken down the like STI and services that we have as well. So if you want to also include our Instagrams on there, like it will give that information a lot further.
Awesome. And I think they Huckleberry commented on our Facebook with the IG. So thank you so much for being here, and to our audience, we will see you all next time. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.